Tonight we have 6 stories, from tales involving music, roller coasters, and some odd happenings. This lineup is filled with much to be terrified about. We are also joined by my good friend Stories After Midnight, who will be reading story 2. If you enjoy his narration, I heavily recommend checking out his channel. He's been putting in a ton of work, and, in my opinion, needs more ears on him. A huge thank you to all of tonight's writers for allowing me to share their stories. Without them, this video wouldn't have been possible. Remember to send in your story if you'd like to have it featured. You can either submit it at my subreddit, r/slumberreads, or my email you can find in the description. Be sure to drop a like if you enjoy. Subscribing if you're new is also very much appreciated. Enjoy the video, and as always, I hope you all have a great night. Music has always been a part of my life. Throughout my childhood, I took delight in discovering new music and new music genres. My mother was a big inspiration for this, as she showed me much of the music from her generation's youth. I was hooked. Through my teenage years, however, my music taste fell down a darker path. My friends and I developed a taste for music that didn't exactly fit with the pop culture scene, and we reveled in that. There was a lot of argument about what the genre was called. Heavy metal, death metal, and even black metal was a term one of my friends used. Whatever we called it though, our small group of friends felt like it was made just for us. Now in my adulthood, that same group of friends and I are still very close. We, of course, grew up, got jobs, and a couple of us even started families. We would get together for poker nights and barbecues from time to time. We'd hit up movies here and there, and my buddy Charles would always drag us to the bowling alley. All in all, I would say I lived a typical adulthood. Until now. Oh my god, Liz shouted from 2 aisles away. She lifted up an old vinyl to show me her discovery. Her eyes lit up as if she had just discovered the Holy Grail. "I loved this album when I was a kid," she exclaimed, as she flipped the record case around to read the back. Nostalgia is a beautiful thing when you become an adult. My little band of friends and I had developed a bit of a hobby to indulge in that nostalgia. A new multimedia store had opened up in town, and the 5 of us frequented the spots often. They had movies, music CDs, and the such, but one particular area of the store held our interest the most: the vinyl section. It took some time for my friends to get me into the hobby of collecting old vinyl records, but one day, I relented. I was definitely late to the party, but found myself obsessing over it fairly quickly. We would always compare our collections, as well as any new finds. I even went out of my way to purchase a record player, as to enjoy my old music, and not just collect it for the sake of collecting. "Oh, nice find," I said to Liz, as she displayed the cover art to me, as if she was showing me the prize in a game show. "Are there any more? I loved Alice Cooper." I shuffled through the albums trying to find a copy for myself. "Nope," she said, purposely pointing her nose in the air. "He's all mine. I had a big old crush on him when I was younger." I smirked at her with my eyebrow raised. Liz and I were very close. We had a sort of unspoken thing between us when we were teenagers, but never acted on it. We both moved on and got married to other people, but the unspoken things still linger, as I felt a bit jealous of her comment. She giggled and began searching through the records for discoveries. Charles and Josh walked up to us, and I let out a sarcastic, "Oh my hell," as I saw the stack of records Josh was holding. We were in the store for all of 10 minutes, and Josh had already found an album for each one of those minutes. "Psh, I'm ready to go, man," Josh said with a big grin. "I'm gonna be a bit longer, dude," I said, shaking my head and continuing to browse. Several minutes passed as I continued my search. One particular album caught my eye at the end of the aisle. I squinted my eyes to zone in on it and make my approach to check it out. As I lifted the record, more of the artwork began to appear. My mouth hung open in interest as I began examining the artwork. The setting appeared to be in some kind of dark cave. What I can only imagine were people in the foreground doing various things. I say they were people, but each one seemed deformed, all in their own ways. Some had several limbs. A couple of them had broken and distorted arms. One even had the skin and muscle completely missing on one arm, as it just hung down useless. Their faces were equally deformed. Some had skeletal looking faces, as if starvation just wasn't enough torture. One person had an eyeball hanging from the socket, while another directly next to it was missing its lower jaw. I closed my mouth quickly as I realized I had it open for an awkwardly long time. I continued staring at the artwork as new aspects of it continued to pop out at me. Oh, these poor people were thin and withered, with an almost yellowish green hue to their skin. They were dressed in rags and chains. Each one was doing something different in the artwork. I was amazed at the creativity presented in front of me. One person was chopping up a pile of meat and bones with a meat cleaver. Another was dragging a dead body with a noose. The one with the exposed skeleton for an arm looked to be dumping a pile of bodies down a well. I cringed as I saw the sight of one of them popping an eyeball in between its fingers from a dead, slumped-over victim. "This is awesome," I whispered to myself as I admired the artwork. I almost felt like I was peering into one of those old Where's Waldo books from when I was a kid, as I would discover something interesting the more I looked. This was not the kind-hearted book from my childhood, though. I had to buy it, if not for the album art alone. The title of the album caught my eye among the creepy visuals displayed in front of me. O Neoteris Sklavos Ma. I comically tried to pronounce it, but gave up fairly quickly. "Ah, gross," Liz yelled, while peering at the album over my shoulder. "Ah, damn it, you scared me," I yelled back, as I cowered from the sudden startle. Liz giggled again, and said she's ready to go. I made my purchase, and we left. I arrived home and immediately brought my new album to the record player. If the music was as creative as the artwork, I would be very impressed. The music was average at best. Deep synth guitars filled each track with a heavy emphasis on longer notes. The vocals were low, raspy growls in another language. I couldn't make out the language, but it was obviously foreign. I scoffed at hearing low screams in the background of a few songs. This was a kind of trope a lot of musicians used during the heyday of metal. They like to sneak in little Easter eggs here and there to create a sort of mystique behind their work. After a full listen of the album, I put the record back in its sleeve. I would say I liked it, but it wasn't anything too special. Still, I couldn't wait to show Josh. He was the one that started us all on this vinyl collecting trend. Even though I wasn't amazed by the music, I still felt like I had found a unique gem. Years passed, and the four of us lightened up on our collecting habits, until Charles messaged all of us one day regarding a new discovery he had made. Going through his old collection, he discovered his player could do something unique. It had the ability to play his records backwards. While this might seem a bit uninteresting in the world of metal music, this offered a new way to enjoy the genre, again focusing on the Easter egg trend of cleverly hiding things in the music. Some artists planted hidden messages in a track, which is only heard when played in reverse. Charles was excited to bring his new discovery to the group, which kind of invigorated our interest in our old collecting habit. From there on out, the four of us would send audio clips back and forth of new discoveries from playing it in reverse. To my astonishment, several of my favorite bands had hidden message littered through their work. One band had a very creepy one that just said, "Join us," repeatedly. It wouldn't have been so creepy if the title of the song wasn't Hell Awaits. Another band message was just a comedic "Thank you for finding the hidden track." Most of the hidden vocals were just drug references though, but one in particular apparently caused a huge outcry as a listener contemplating suicide listened to one particular album with a hidden message. When played backwards, the voice simply repeated, "Do it," over and over. Many believed this was the catalyst to his inevitable suicide. Personally, I didn't believe that one bit. A feeling of wonder coursed through me as I gazed back at my old vinyl collection. If any of my albums had a special message in it, the dark metal album with the crazy artwork had to have something. I grabbed it quickly and excitedly removed the record from its sleeve, placing it on my player. I grinned eagerly as I placed the needle in the middle of it. Unfortunately, my record player didn't have the function of flipping a switch and playing in reverse like Charles did. I had to reverse it manually, trying to reverse it at a proper speed as to hear any messages lingering in the music. I placed my ear close to my speaker. For the first few minutes, nothing. Just that same deep guitar paired with the raspy vocals, but in reverse. Since I didn't know the language in the first place, playing it in reverse was pretty much the same. "Hello?" a voice said softly from my speaker. I jumped back at the sound but continued, turning my record. I squinted my eyes and tilted my head as I stared into the speaker. Did I just find the hidden message? If so, it was very short and in English, no less. I continued to stare as I spun the record. "Thank you for finding me," the voice continued in a growled tone. I smiled and shook my head at the thought of finding another hidden track that simply thanks you for finding it. "What's your name?" the message continued. I was perplexed by this. Why would someone ask a question on a vinyl track that they couldn't possibly get an answer to? I remained quiet. "That's okay. I don't have a name either," it continued. "I do, however, have special work to do, and I need your help to do it." I continued listening with a bit of a sarcastic look on my face. "I know right now, you think I'm just a hidden track with the artist blabbering away. Go ahead, ask me something," the voice commanded. I let out a humorous laugh. "Okay then, how is it that you've come to be stuck in a vinyl record?" I said in a giggly reply. "This is my portal. This is my means in which to communicate to you. This is why I'm very happy you have found me," he replied. I shot back, taking my hand from the record player. The record stopped spinning as I simply stared at its now static state. No, I whispered to myself as I felt myself back into the wall. The room was eerily quiet as I stared for several seconds. My curiosity outweighed my fear, however. I moved towards the record player and slowly placed my hand on the album, which color seemed even blacker than before. I began spinning again. "Don't worry, my innocent friend," the voice from my speaker said. "You may be confused now, but soon, you and I will make a great team. You can count on it." What do you want from me?" I asked, tripping over my words. "There are certain tasks I need you to complete. Once you complete these for me, I will contemplate setting you free," the voice said sternly. "Set me free? What are you talking about?" I retorted, confused by its words. "You're mine now. If you do not complete these tasks set in front of you, there will be a punishment," it snapped back. I once again pulled my hand from the record player and hastily removed the record. I stared at it, holding it up with both hands briefly. I chucked it across the room in rage. I watched as it slid across the ground and under my couch. I stared at the floor, wondering what had just happened. I heard a rumbling under my feet. I ducked down in fright at the sudden sound. I felt the ground vibrate underneath me as I witnessed several items from my shelves and tables begin moving. I covered my head and cowered on the ground as several items from around my room were thrown at me by an invisible force. Stop it! Stop it! I yelled in terror. It did just that. The rumbling stopped. All of the items around my room began to settle down. I looked around the room with eyes wide open. Another eerie silence filled the room. I looked back at my record player. I knew what it wanted. Terror filled me as I placed my hand back on the cold, black vinyl. I began spinning it. "Well," the horrific voice said, "do we have a deal?" "What do you want me to do?" I replied, with a tear rolling down my cheek. "I have your attention now. That's all I need for the moment. Come back to me tonight at midnight. Don't be late, or there will be more punishment," I said in a much deeper growled voice. I stopped spinning and stared blankly at the bare wall in front of me. What is this? Why is this happening? As I peered around at the mess made on the floor, I knew it wasn't my imagination. In defeat, I slowly cleaned up the mess made in my living room. Could this being really hurt me if it wanted to? The example it gave me just now filled me with terror, as the answer I gave to myself was yes. I tried all I could to carry on with my day. I had dinner with my wife, who noticed something was wrong, no matter how much I was trying to hide it. After telling her I was simply tired, she relented and offered an early night. For her, that's what it was going to be. For me, not so much. I stared at my clock sitting on my end table, 11:58 p.m. My gaze went to my record player. I shook my head slowly as a flash of anxiety hit me. 11:59 p.m. The dread I felt as I watched my clock click to the next minute was intense. I wanted nothing more than to go back to bed and fall asleep under the covers with my wife. 12 a.m. I slowly stepped towards the player, reaching my hand out to it. The same words, "O Neoteris, Sklavos Ma," etched the inner lining of the record. I felt another tear roll down my face. As I pressed my palm on the record, I began spinning it. You can follow simple instructions. Good. The voice remarked in a confident tone. I didn't reply. I stared at the spinning vinyl. Your first task is an easy one. There is a church 3 miles east from here. It sits at the bottom of the mountain base on this very road. Go to it, it commanded. You have a toolbox, yes? It continued. There is a steel grate on the sidewalk in front of the church. Open it. Bring that steel grate back to me. What do you want with a steel grate? I whispered in a jittery tone. My reasons are my own. Do you prefer to be punished? It said sharply. Okay, I'll do it. I quickly replied. I looked around in paranoia as I placed my tool chest into my trunk. My neighbors all knew me, but I still felt a sense that I was doing something wrong, even though the simple task this being in that record wanted me to do seemed strange. I felt like what I was about to do was going to end badly. I arrived at the church and turned off my headlights as to not bring any unnecessary attention to myself. As I parked in the church lot, the church was exactly where the voice said, also exactly where described. A steel grate in the sidewalk looked back at me. I looked around again as I placed my toolbox on the ground. Why was this thing making me bring at something so useless once removed from the sidewalk? Was there something actually in the sewer tunnel below it that it would inevitably make me investigate? Removing it took a bit of work, but I was able to pull the heavy steel from the ground. After loading it and my toolbox into the trunk, I began my trek home. I brought the grate into the house, leaning it against the wall. I began spinning the record for further instructions as to not be punished. You've done well, O Anthropos, it stated. I swear, for some reason, I knew it was grinning through its disembodied voice. Go get some rest now. Come back to me at the same time tomorrow. I will have further instructions. It once again commanded in that same stern growl. I went to bed, but I did not rest. I laid in bed all night staring at the ceiling. My sleepless night didn't go unnoticed as my wife commented on my puffed up face the next morning. A quick glimpse in the mirror showed a very unrecognizable sight. The bags under my eyes were prominent with a pale complexion across my face. I called in sick to work that day and tried to put the events out of my mind to live a somewhat normal day before I had to go back to that thing. I began clicking through channel after channel, unable to settle on one station due to my nerves. A quick screenshot got my attention as I clicked back several channels to try and find it. I did. It was the church I visited last night. It was on the news. The actual news of what was reported was devastating. I held both hands to my mouth as I slowly slid off the couch in horror at what I was seeing. One of the priests at the church was killed early this morning before dawn. He had fallen down a suspiciously open sewer opening. The fall snapped his neck when he landed, and he died instantly. The police that were interviewed blamed the open sewer on mischievous kids and asked for help finding them. I knew better. This was my doing. I helped this thing kill. 11:59 p.m. I found myself staring at the record player once more. This time, I felt a sense of anger due to what it made me do, albeit without my knowledge. 12 a.m. I quickly began spinning the record. This time, I spoke before it could. Why did you make me do that? I said in a rage, but not too loud as to wake my wife. There was no point. It was a senseless death. You gained nothing. Silence filled the room as I awaited its reply. After a few seconds, it spoke. I've gained more than you realize. It started in a whisper. That priest you killed? We've had dealings. He was the only one who knew me and how to lock me away again. Now that he's gone, you're all mine. I stopped spinning the record and stared in shock at what it just told me. I quickly began spinning it again, though, as to not anger it. Why are you doing this to me? I asked, not really wanting to hear its answer. It didn't respond to my inquiry. Your next task will prove what you're capable of, to me and to yourself. You will go to the edge of town on a road called Genesee Avenue. The number on the house is 1000. Go to it. You will find a lonely man sleeping. You must pierce his heart. Bring me the knife you use. It said with a growl in every sentence. What? No. I will not kill purposely. You can throw all you want at me. I won't do it, I replied, surprised at what this thing was asking me to do. Punishment awaits if you don't follow my instructions, it stated simply. I stopped spinning the record. I stood in wait for another one of the entity's temper tantrums. Nothing happened. Several minutes went by with me standing in the living room. I went to bed a short time later. My exhaustion from the previous night allowed me to sleep despite my terror. I woke up to my phone ringing. I quickly jumped up to reach for my nightstand and answer. "Hello?" I whispered with a groggy voice. Crying was heard on the other line. It was Liz. "Charles, he's gone," she said, forcing out every word through her sobs. "What? What happened?" I yelped as I sat up straight. My cry awakened my wife, who also shot up with eyes wide open. She couldn't hear Liz, but she knew something was wrong. "I don't know," she continued while crying. "The police say his bookshelf fell on him, breaking his back. He's gone." "No," I whispered to myself as I looked at my wife. I drove straight to Charles' house to meet up with Liz and Josh. We cried a lot that day. Our friend was dead. After several hours with my friends, I returned home. As I walked into my living room, a terrible thought went through my mind as I stared at the record player. Was this my punishment? I begrudgingly began spinning the record. "Did you get my message?" it asked almost as soon as I started spinning. "Why him?" I whispered in defeat. "Why didn't you take me instead?" "I need you. If you do not listen to my commands, your punishments will become far worse. You may be sleeping alone if you don't comply." My eyes lit up as I realized what he meant. My wife. He was threatening my wife. "Do you remember my orders from last night?" it asked. I nodded my head, forgetting it probably couldn't see me. I was wrong. "Good. You have one more chance. Go," it yelled. I stood out in front of the house. 1000 was imprinted by the door. I grasped a butcher's knife in my right hand tightly. As I approached the front door, I turned the handle. It was unlocked. With eyes wide open, I began walking into the dark house. I found him in his bedroom, asleep. It was almost as if I was watching things unfold in front of me, like I was watching someone else's actions. As I slowly lifted the knife, more tears rolled down my face as the sleeping man slowly came out of his sleep. His glazed eyes slowly peered towards me as I plunged the knife deep into his chest. I returned home. I stood in the doorframe to my living room for several minutes, staring at that damn record player and cursing it for what it made me do. With my blood-stained hand pressed against the vinyl, I spun it yet again. "You've proven yourself, O Anthropos. But I have one more task for you before you can rest again." It began as I stared into the blackness of the vinyl. "Let's see what you're really made of. I see you've brought me my knife, as requested. You must use it one more time." It was amused by what it was doing to me. "I don't want to kill anymore," I said softly, gazing down at the bloody knife. "This will be your last, for a while, at least," it offered. "No," I said under my breath. "She's asleep right now. Easy prey." It started ignoring my pleas. "The street name is Millwood Avenue. The number on the house is 620. It continued its orders. I looked up slowly. That was my address. This thing was ordering me to kill my own wife. I couldn't take anymore. "No, do what you want to me and only me. I don't care anymore. I will not kill for you again, especially my own wife," I demanded with a scowl. A cry was heard from my speaker. It was a soft, feminine cry. "Help me. Please. Help me." The soft voice said while sobbing. It was Liz. "If you disobey me, your little friend will suffer from your misdeeds," it said in between a maniacal laugh. "No, I can't kill anymore. Not for you, not for me," I said, hanging my head down. A gurgling sound emanated from the speaker. Liz screamed as much as she could through the gurgling sounds. I heard her body drop to the floor through my speaker as I fell to my knees, still spinning that damn record as if instinctual. "I believe you have much more to take, and I will," it coldly said. I lifted my hand from the record and peered towards my staircase that led to my bedroom. This thing was going to pick off every one of my friends and family. I didn't do what I was told. I stood over you, holding the bloody knife in my hand. I pondered what to do next as I watched you sleep. There was only one thing to do. You may not understand this, but I'm leaving this here for you so you know why I did what I did. It can't control me if there's no me. Please know. I'm truly sorry to leave you. You don't deserve this. Please give my story to the police so they know who did all of this. I tried to destroy the album. It rebuilds itself each time. Please, hide that damn thing where no one will ever see it again. The knife I used to puncture that poor man's heart will be the same knife that punctures my heart tonight. The heart that loved you so much. Oh, and I did some research. The title of that album, it's Greek. It means my newest slave.
This happened a long time ago, around 6 years to be exact. Me and my two friends decided that it would be fun if we got out of the house and went on some big field trip together. You see, we live in a relatively small town located in a country in the Balkans, so we were pretty bored of the same old scenery and same old streets where we used to hang out. We were only 14 at the time and thought nothing of it at the time. We decided that this old tower located way north of the town would be perfect for a new place to hang out. It was one of those very old watchtowers used by the Ottoman Empire at the time of their occupation of the country. We saw some pictures that people took while they were there, but strangely enough, we never saw a single image of what the inside of the tower looked like, so we thought that we could be the first to photograph it. So we left our houses, bags on our backs, ready to explore and have fun. It wasn't very far from where we live, around 4 kilometers to be exact, so we didn't bring too many supplies and stuff like that, because we didn't think we'd need it. I thought of bringing a knife or something like that, because I was an avid collector at the time, but I decided not to. Biggest mistake I would ever make. When we got out of our town and into the village nearby, that was next to the hill where the tower was located, all we saw was nice locals and not much else. As we went into the forest leading to the tower, we got a sudden feeling of loneliness and dread around us, like we had just left the safety of the town and moved into a quiet and deadly land. Going up the hill, things seemed fine until we saw a bag on the floor. We didn't think much of it, but still thought to check it because it might have belonged to somebody that lost it. Inside, we saw a lot of supplies and food that looked pretty fresh and non-rotten, almost as if it's been left there recently. We couldn't find any form of identification, so we decided to leave it there. As we moved a little further up, we saw it. The tower, looking as if it was just built. Even though I regret going there, seeing that tower was a feeling of something like magic, having finally made it. As we went up and got in front of the tower, we saw 2 benches and a weird, huge hole in the ground that looks like it was once some sort of well. We decided to take a picture together to commemorate our achievement of finally getting there after 2 hours of walking. It was about 3 p.m. when we got there, so we decided to climb up the tower and go on top so we could chill there. We had a lot of fun there, and the view was really beautiful. It looked like an old painting overlooking an even older town. It felt truly beautiful to go up there during the hot summer and just feel the cold wind. My friend brought a speaker so we could listen to some music. It was a blast just to sit around and clear my mind. Not a single soul was up there, and it was just peace and quiet. Truly blissful. My best friend even had the idea to camp the night here, but looking back at it, I'm glad we didn't. We even brought some spray paint to mark our names somewhere to remember the day. But we decided to do it on a piece of fallen debris outside of the castle, out of respect. Since the town we live in is relatively small, there aren't many tourists that visit this place. Eventually the time passed and it was 8 p.m. The sun had started going down, so we decided to stay about half an hour longer. Suddenly at around 8:20, it got really dark. We decided to go back because our parents were probably worried, and we didn't want to get lost in the dark. As we started going down the tower, it was really dark and cold, something straight out of a horror movie. We barely stumbled down the stairs and got down to the exit. All of a sudden we heard a scream so horrible and piercing that I'll never forget it, no matter how much therapy and drugs they try to give me. We started running as fast as possible and almost fell into the hole in the ground. All of a sudden we turned around and saw something that scarred into my mind until the very day I die. A gigantic, skeletal humanoid. The body was very wide and tall, but incredibly skinny. The head was incredibly pale and lifeless with an always bleeding mouth. Its eyes were white, almost like lights, and its mouth was unhinged and looked like it was just about to fall off. Although I didn't get a good look at it, the hands and feet looked completely normal, almost like a human's. Strangely enough, we still heard distant screaming coming from the highest point of the tower, even though the creature was in front of us. The screaming seemed far away, and almost disappearing into the wind. We ran for our lives as the creature was coming to us, not with any murderous intent, however. It looked curious, almost like a dog when it sees something it's interested in. We ran into the forest, and my friend threw his bag on the ground to hopefully distract the thing while we were running away. As we looked behind on the tower we were once happy to see, a woman was on the edge, looking down and ready to jump. Her face looked strangely noticeable and specific. Even though we were 100 meters away, we could see her face completely. It was almost as if she said something, but I couldn't see what it was. We didn't quite see what happened, because we were already meters away from whatever that thing, place was. We were all in shock. We just kept running into the dense forest, hoping we were still following the trail that led us here. Not once for a single second did we stop and check if it was still behind us. We were all too afraid to turn around and look. We came back home to our houses really late at night, all of us pale-faced and traumatized by the event. My best friend at the time, who was with us, tried to kill himself because, as he said, he was haunted by the images of the woman, strangely not the creature. I remember trying to explain what happened to the authorities, but to no avail. No one helped us. We had to go through days and days, and eventually years of therapy, so that we can even go on with our lives after that. I still don't talk a lot with my then friends. I'm not quite sure why. My other friend is completely fine, however still refuses to talk to me. I don't know what that thing was, or why it was ever in that place, or who that woman was. And I'm hopefully never going to find out.
I'm sorry if the story seems rushed. I had to get the story out. After what happened, this event will go down in history. I'm a nurse at a hospital in Coast Norwood, and this day, I was evacuating patients to the high floor of this building. A giant meteorite crashed into the ocean near Galveston and the Norwood area and generated a tsunami, and I only had 5 minutes to evacuate patients, visitors, and staff members. With all the time I had left, I didn't get everyone, which was evident. Right as I was rushing a mom and her child upstairs, a giant wall of water punched through the glass skin of the hospital. The water chasing me down a hallway and soon caught up to me and dragged me with it. I was drenched in ocean water, and I was being tossed around like a rag doll on a trampoline. I was ripped out of the safety of the hospital and was traveling with the surge. The debris in the water was scraping my skin like knives. The sharp pain traveled up my spine, making my back curl. I could see myself moving further and further from the hospital. I was moving like driftwood or a rubber duck in a bathtub. Cars and trucks rushing past me, and one car slammed my back. My world was turned into darkness, and I'm pretty sure my unconscious body was being tossed around in the water like bullets. Sometimes, it's good to think for yourself, even when your life is in danger, like mine. I woke up, still in the water, traveling down what I assumed a neighborhood road. While I was drifting down the road, I slammed into a car, which was crashed into a house. I reached the car and struggled to pull myself up onto the roof of the car. I finally heaved myself on top of it. When I got on top of it, I noticed my hospital scrubs were covered in blood. I immediately checked my torso for any wound. Luckily, I had none, but unfortunately, it had to have been someone else's blood. I sat atop the car roof and glanced at my surroundings. The water was still swiftly moving down the road, cars, couches, and other household items being washed away. The palm trees waterlogged and dripping in water. With the leaves flattened down, my scan was soon interrupted by a hand slapping against a car. I jump and look to see it's a woman trying to seek safety. I grab her arm and pull her up on top the car. I slide her on the car roof, making the roof warp inside the car. I search the wounds on the woman and quickly spot one on her abdomen. Something was off about this wound. It looked like cat scratches. They weren't deep into her skin, but deep enough to make them noticeable. My nursing sense jumped, and I checked the rest of her body for wounds. What are you doing? The woman grabbed my arm, which halted my search. Ma'am, I'm a nurse. I'm checking to see if you have wounds, I explain. The woman then lays her head back down in the car and looks at me. She has the same blue eyes and black hair complexion like me. Ma'am, you have a wound on your abdomen, like cat scratches. I lift her shirt and show her the wound. The woman then proceeds to explain how she received those scratches. When I was stuck in the water, something kept scratching my stomach nonstop. The woman mimics the scratching. I was starting to think about how the debris in the wave felt like knives scraping my skin, so I speculated debris against her stomach. Ma'am, I think debris was the cause of your wounds. I place her shirt back down. We needed to get off the car roof before it collapsed, because the roof is starting to sink deeper into the car. I look at the woman, still laying on the car, and her eyes are closed. I shake her, and she jolts upright. What? The woman wipes the wet hair out of her face. The car roof is about to collapse, so we need to get on the roof of the house. Luckily, the car is high enough to climb onto the roof of the house. I grab the woman's arms and pull her up. I grab her waist and lift her up, and she gets off the roof. Then she pulls herself up. She slides the rest of her body on the roof, and she reaches for me. No need, ma'am. I squat down. Then I jump and catch hold of the roof shingles. I pull myself up and slide my body on the roof. I look up at the woman, and she has her knees tucked into her chest, and she is glimpsing at the water passing by. So, what's your name? I sit next to her, trying to start a conversation. My name is Sophia. I'm visiting here from Poland. She looks at me, wiping her wet hair out of her face. I guess you didn't expect to be in this. I joke. She looks at me and gives a chuckle. Yeah, never knew the coast gets tsunamis. She started to smile. No, this is the first tsunami we've ever had. I giggle a little bit. I just want to say thank you for helping. She then hugs me. I'm a nurse. It's my thing. I hug her back. We sat on the roof for 30 minutes and noticed the water is receding. I gaze down the road where the water is receding, and I spotted another wave. It's an aftershock, but unlike the first one, this wave was smaller. We were still safe on the roof, so I watched the wave flow by the house. And, like every wave, items start to get tossed around. The water level raised and stopped at the gutter on the base of the roof. Then Sophia shakes my shoulders, which startles me. What? I look at Sophia. Look, something's in the water. She points her index to the water. Something is in the water, surrounding the house across from the one we're atop. And someone is on the canopy on the house across. It was a man. He looks frightened. I get up on my feet. I was going to get the man's attention. Hey, I yelled. The man looks up with the most frightful face ever. He almost cried. Help me, please, the man burst. And without a blink of an eye, whatever was surrounding the house jumped on the roof. The man screamed in apprehension and then was dragged into the water. I couldn't see the entire body of what pulled the man in the flood, but we knew we weren't safe. We couldn't do anything. My phone was missing, and we can't jump to another rooftop. All we can hear was rushing water, and the house is creaking. Then I realized the house that we were on was also creaking. I twirl myself around to see something trying to get on the roof. It wasn't human, but I didn't know where to go or what to do. Sophia must have saw as well because she handed me a big limb of a tree. I clamp my hand on the stick and start to whack the creature the hardest I can. This may sound idiotic, but the creature swam away. Then I broke the stick to a stub. Sophia and I are stranded on a rooftop, but not for long. The water started to recede back again, which means here comes the third aftershock. I can see the wave. This one was taller. Not taller than the first wave, but tall enough to go over the canopy of the houses being submerged. I and Sophia prepared to clamp down on the roof shingles. The wave washed over the roof, and we got drenched in water. I held my breath, and the wave passed. I stood up and noticed the water raised a significant amount, taller than half of the canopy that can only fit 4 people. I stare into the murky brown water until I heard Sophia scream at the top of her lungs. I look at what she was screaming at, and the thing is on the roof with us, crawling to us on the other end of the canopy. Now I was able to get a good description of what it is. It was like a mermaid, but it was gray and slimy, and like a mermaid is depicted in fairy tales. The top half wasn't human. It had an alien-like torso, with 3 arms on each side, a total of 6 arms. The head was a squid, but unlike Cthulhu, between the tentacles was a beak. Inside the beak was a giant throat that can fit a whole person inside. We were trapped. The only escape we had was the water, but we would quickly get snatched up. I risked it and plunged into the water, swimming to a building next door. I clamp onto the ledge of the building and pull myself onto the flat canopy. While I put my right leg over the ledge, I look over to find Sophia. She and the thing were gone. I pull the rest of me and fall onto the flat roof. I lay there, comprehending that Sophia was gone. She was there, next meal to devour on. My guilt kicks in. I should have pushed her into the water. I should have forced her to swim, but I didn't. I swam for myself. This was the pinnacle of selfishness. I lie on the canopy, curled up in a ball sobbing a river. I abandoned Sophia on the roof, and it ate her with the colossal jaws. I pull myself together and start to look for anything to protect myself, to keep myself safe from the Lovecraftian designed monster. Who knew if you would still be alive in its mouth, or even in its stomach? I spot a metal rod, which was perfect. It wouldn't break like the flimsy tree branch, and it was metal. Metal is the strongest type of weapon I obtained. Knocking someone on the noggin with the rod will be knocked out. I start to practice my swings if the element comes anywhere near me. Then I heard splashing from the left of me. I turn, and nothing was in the water. My senses advised me that it was a trap. I turn to my right, and all 6 arms of the thing are clenching the ledge of the canopy, and I swing my metal rod and hit its head. All limbs release, and it plunged into the water. I start to shuffle against the ledge on the canopy and lay down. I was going to lay there until I feel confident to even sit up. I lay there until night came, when all I can see were the stars in the sky, since the power went out in the city. You can see the things that became covered in light pollution. Colors like white, purple, even pink, and black can now be fully seen. But then I heard a gurgling. I start to get apprehensive. The gurgling was a deep gurgle. I try to be as quiet as I can, and scan the canopy with the light of the stars illuminating. Then something rises out of the water. Something colossal. I was never so scared in my life. I never stayed this silent in my life. It was almost 40 feet tall and was on 4 legs. It was ginormous. That's all I can remember of what it looked like. I stayed down, and the towering thing let out a hellish roar. I sit up a little, and I see a million of the mermaid things rise from the water. It was like an onslaught. It started to rain. Thunder growls and lightning strikes all around me. Clouds above the colossal being started to swirl around it, and a giant beam of the white light showed, like they were about to enter the gates of heaven. Then, the thing starts to shapeshift into a giant human. It roars another hellish roar into the sky. I'm in full panic mode. All the anxiety starts to fill my chest till I pass out. That giant thing was a shapeshifter. I woke up, still laid against the ledge. I shakenly sit up and look at my surroundings. The water was gone. I jump off the roof and fall a mattress that was below, and started to find my way back to the hospital. A few hours later, I found it. The first and second stories were destroyed, but the 3rd floor stayed dry. But I noticed I'm the only person still in the city. It's like a ghost town. The generators in the hospital were still working, so I was able to stay in a place with electricity. I'm going to call for help and get some rest for the next day. But right now I'm here to tell you something. No city, no civilization, no rescue, no Sophia. I messaged for help, and someone came. They asked me for a witness, and I shared everything. The rescue team became puzzled that I was the only person here, in a town with a population of 400,000 people. I told them about the colossal monster and the mermaid-like things, but that is what made them think I was fibbing. I told them that someone was devoured by a mermaid-like thing, They deemed it off as a shark attack. I dealt with it. No way I would convince them to believe me. This was called the worst tsunami in history. They thought the entire town was dragged out into the ocean, but leaving me behind. I have done countless news stories and sharing my story, even telling them about the creatures. Everyone thinks I'm insane. I don't know what or where the creature came from, but I think I know one place they might have come from that makes the most sense to me. I think the creatures came from the meteorite and was picked up in the tsunami. They could still be out there. Whenever the next flood, hurricane, or tsunami comes, just know they could be lurking in the water, and they can attack you at any given time. This story took place around 2007. I remember this happened at a Six Flags amusement park, but I've been to a few different ones across different states, and I can't remember exactly which one this story takes place in. I do remember that this was my first time riding a roller coaster. When we arrived, my friend Christian was with me. "Is this the first time riding a roller coaster?" Christian asked. "Yeah, kinda nervous," I responded. "They're a lot of fun. You'll see." Christian replied in a reassuring tone. The line was very long. We must have waited about 2 hours. Apparently this was one of the newer roller coasters, hence why everyone decided to go to the one Christian and I were waiting in. When it was almost our turn to go on the roller coaster, we saw someone lose their hat while the roller coaster was going straight. You better have a good grip on your iPod. You wouldn't want that to end up like that person's hat now, would you? Remember, this story was set in 2007 when iPods were relevant. I'll try to make sure I don't lose it, I said nervously. It was finally our turn to go on the roller coaster. We sat towards the back, because all the other seats ahead of us were already filled. You know how most roller coasters stop at the highest point for what seems like forever? I saw someone climb over a fence that prevented people from getting too close to the roller coaster. My eyes widened. I pointed him out to Christian. "That's the person who lost his hat," Christian said in a surprised way. I didn't get a chance to respond, because after he said that, the roller coaster started going on an incredibly fast speed. The person who went over the fence was still a few yards away, and I figured he was going to quickly grab his hat and go back over the fence. Apparently he had no idea where his hat was. He must have been too focused into looking for the hat, and ignored the screams and noise that the roller coaster makes. We were getting closer to him. He finally sees his hat. The hat was directly under the path of where the roller coaster goes. People were screaming at him to move, but it didn't work. The roller coaster hit the person. It splattered his head into a million different pieces. Chunks of him were on the other passengers, and red splatters were all over the roller coaster. While Christian and I were spared the pieces from the person that had just died in front of us, we were not spared of seeing the person's head explode before us. Most of the passengers in front of us started to vomit after the ride was over. Christian and I didn't say anything. We just went to find our parents and asked them to take us home. "You guys want to go home already? What happened?" my mom asked. "You aren't feeling too good," I replied. "Okay, well I hope you guys had fun." We nodded our heads and we headed towards the exit. This is when we heard a lot of sirens from various emergency vehicles. Just before we left, we had to pass the roller coaster one more time. We saw the person's family sobbing for the death of the boy. I'll never forget what the mother said. "Why did I let this happen?" I can't help to think that the mother was blaming herself for the loss of her son. I mean, what mother would allow her son to climb over a fence to a damn roller coaster? At the entrance, there were a lot of police cars, ambulances, and fire trucks. Everyone in our group rushed out of there. I ended up telling my mom what Christian and I saw. She said she understood and just took me home. The ride was silent. What kept bothering me was that I never got to find out what the mother meant about her son. What do you think happened? It all happened 6 months ago. I thought it would be a good idea to visit my brother and his family in my home country, Mexico, since I haven't seen him in a while. I live in Canada, so it was a really long trip there. When I came there, it felt great to be back in my home country. As soon as I arrived from the airport, my brother and his family were there to greet me, and it felt really good to see my family after our parents died in that car crash 10 years ago. To make a long story short, I had a great time there. However, on the day before I was supposed to leave, we decided to go to the zoo with my brother's kids. This zoo was around for a long time, since the 1950s, I believe. I remember going there as a child and being amazed by all the animals and exhibits that they had. I remember there being rumors and stories about people going missing there, even some parents being dead serious on their children disappearing in there. However, no one who ever worked in the zoo was ever arrested or even questioned, but at the time, we thought nothing of them, and just labeled all of the stories and reports as simple rumors and urban legends. We would soon come to regret that. When we first arrived there, my brother's 2 kids, a 5-year-old girl and a 6-year-old boy, were obviously very excited. It was their first time in the zoo after all. What kid wouldn't be happy to see a monkey or an elephant in real life? Their mother stayed at home to get some rest, so it was just the 4 of us. It was great for the most part, until of course, the incident. A strange man came up to us and asked if we wanted to see the hidden exhibit that only those chosen by the zoo can see. Me and my brother were obviously cautious. He was a police officer and had heard the rumors and theories about this zoo and its strange going-ons. However, he saw the look on his children's eyes, the look of anticipation and joy, the look that any child gives their parents when they truly want something. I was inclined to trust him because most of the staff around us clearly recognized and greeted the man, so we caved in, handed in the money, and followed the man to the strange, old and rusted door that looked really old and was almost falling off. The man struggled a little bit with the lock and finally managed to open the door. At that point, we all got really cautious, and my brother gave the man a strange look as he followed us into what looked a lot like a cave. We got a little less worried when we saw more people around us. As we got deeper in, we saw something that I'll never forget. The creature, seemingly humanoid, was locked inside a huge cage. Its screaming was insanely loud and irritatingly long. Its body was fat and very monkey-like. Its hands were in chains, and it wore what seemed like some sort of mask to restrain its mouth. It didn't have any fur, and had very smooth, white skin. It was about 3 or 5 meters in size, and had long, black hair on the back of its neck and head. Its face, what I could see of it, had huge red fluid around its beard and neck. Before I knew it, I was on the ground and blacked out. Then I woke up in a hospital. All I could remember was seeing my brother on the ground next to me. My arms and legs were broken. I'm still recovering, and will be able to walk in a few months, hopefully. I heard no sign of my brother or my niece and nephew. I was trying to convince anyone of the zoo's fault, but no one believes me. No matter what I try to do, no one from the police would ever try to help me, or even hear me out for that matter. They said I was delusional and that I killed my brother and his kids, and that I hid their bodies away. My sister's wife is in complete shock. Even after 6 months, she still doesn't believe a word I say. No matter how hard I try to convince anyone, all I get is people calling me a liar and a murderer. I heard they're gonna put me in an asylum when my legs are fully recovered. I'm scared. Please, someone help me. Alice looked over at her husband Marshall. He lay slumped in the front passenger seat next to her. The inside of the car was peaceful. Neither talked. The day had been a long one. They had been driving for at least an hour and a half now, and her eyes felt sleepy and her brain felt foggy. The road, a long meandering black river, with the guardrails and edge frighteningly close. She couldn't fall asleep now. The car would careen off the Pacific Coast Highway with her and Marshall in it. Alice sighed and wondered where things had gone so wrong. Marshall had been the perfect husband, but the bliss only lasted for 5 years at best, more likely 4, when the alcohol and the PTSD really took hold. Vietnam had been hell for Marshall. He had dreams most nights, and he never forgot a moment. The smells, the screaming, the death. Every one of his senses assaulted by the horrors of war. He was dropped in during the tet, and sometimes Marshall and Alice felt he never left. His discharge came honorably after a sniper shot hit him in the shin, a bullet lodging in his tibia. The pain was still excruciating, and rather than pills, Marshall took to the bottle to quell it. He was an angry drunk. He would say nasty things to Alice, things that made her feel small and weak. She had no recourse as Marshall was her only family, her only support. She took the abuse as best she could, but over time, it became less verbal and increasingly physical. She had tried to run away once, hid a bag, and tried to make it to the car while Marshall slept off the drunken tantrum he had just thrown. As she was putting on her shoes, she lost her balance, her hand reaching back, searching for the counter. In a most unfortunate turn of events, she clipped the keys on the edge of the island, knocking them to the ground below. It was madness. She knew she had precious little time, and she frantically fumbled with the back door and its screen. She only made it halfway through the garage before Marshall caught her. Mercifully, she blacked out after the first couple blows, but the imprint as a whole never left. Alice never tried to run away again. She was afraid of Marshall, as she should be. But she still loved him. She still hoped they could have children, and be the family she always thought they would be. It wouldn't happen, though. Alice talked with her best friend Jen about the matter a lot. Why not leave? I don't know, Jen. I wish I could. Things are so different now. Alice said this with her hand on her forehead and a longing in her heart. I don't want to restart. I don't think I could. Till death do us part, remember? Marshall and I will die together. I know that much. I just wish I knew what was coming in between. If I'll be happy again. Everything in me longs for it and keeps me drawn to him in ways I can't really explain. I just want you to see it the way I see it, Alice. The way we all see it. Jen knew her words were falling on deaf ears. They had had this conversation hundreds of times since the first incident between the two. They've had it every time since. Jen began to cry. Alice had been crying. The section of the PCH they were on winded dangerously back and forth. They must be getting close, Alice thought to herself. She then began to recall a conversation she once had with Marshall, not that long ago. He told her about his friend Derek from the war, a young African-American boy from Louisiana. Marshall was only 25 years old himself when he went away to Vietnam. He couldn't believe how young Derek looked, not a single section of facial hair, and a voice that didn't even seem it hadn't made it through its final transitions of puberty. Marshall liked Derek. He was a breath of fresh air in this place. Almost every American soldier he met was either the definition of a hard ass, or they were too goofy for their own good, the latter seemingly being killed by the bucket load. Marshall kept to himself mostly, and convened with the hard asses when he had to. Derek was different though. He had a strange view on everything, thought of things Marshall never would, and gave him a new perspective. It also scared him at times. Derek seemed almost prophetic. It was like he knew things he couldn't know, things that obviously hadn't happened yet. One time when Marshall was having a particularly bad night, he had a conversation with Derek in hopes he might calm down. It didn't help him at all. I don't know, man. I'm a Christian, Marshall said on the verge of tears. His voice wavered and he paced back and forth as he talked. Derek sat on a cot watching him. I mean, doesn't the Bible tell you, thou shalt not kill? If hell is real, then I'm going. I mean, this is all wrong. Kill or be killed is all wrong. I don't want to do this anymore, Derek. Why me? Why us? Marshall didn't know if he meant him and Derek or the entire country. He felt sick. He didn't want to see death anymore. Any more families with members missing and a house on fire behind them. He also feared for his own life. I don't want to die, man. We're all here for a reason, Marshall. Derek had waited patiently for his friend to vent what he needed to. Then he got up off the cot and looked out into the jungle as he spoke. We all die for a reason too. If you're a good person, the universe knows it. If you're a bad person, the universe knows it. There's no pretending. There's no hiding it. It's only us, people, who try to convince ourselves we're good when we're not. You want to know what I think, Marshall? I think old Joe Kennedy did this. I think he made a deal that only something like this could cash. Imagine it. Imagine you can promise Satan a war that might net him millions of souls. Then when John and Bobby almost ruined the whole thing, they were killed through conspiracy. That's why the family suffers, because of the deals they made. This war is Satan putting the souls that Joe Kennedy condemned. That's why good men are dying, but the bad men here, that's different. Spiritually, our evil manifests itself in a way that's like a beacon of glowing light. Bad people, evil people, are just target practice in the spiritual realm. Bad men deserve to die. I think that's why I'm here. Marshall came to learn what Derek meant by that in time. When Derek was just 15 years old, he killed 2 people. People who were as innocent as a fawn left in the middle of a field by its mama. It was an accident. That's what Derek always told himself, but that never helped much. Derek and a friend were out and about in his hometown with not much to do. They were moseying through the old junkyard, sweating in the hot, thick summer sun. This time of year, the heat in Louisiana was so thick, you could cut it with a knife and eat the slice. Derek was about ready to turn around and just head home when his friend Terry yelled out to him, "Hey bud, I got an idea." They had found an old Iron Eagle 350 engine block on the ground. It was old and rusted in a few places, with a small layer of dirt on top of it. Together, the two boys were just able to lift it and carry it to the ATV they were riding. Terry and Derek had decided it would be funny to throw the engine block through the hole in the chain link fence guarding the overpass. They struggled to lift it for a moment, Derek really straining as he worked to get his knee underneath the large, heavy chunk of metal. Then, with the reaming strength that the two boys had, they sent it over. Derek watched as a sedan, almost like magic, or divine intervention, moved and intercepted the engine block as it tumbled down. There was a deafening boom and the sound of glass shattering. Derek saw a bit of crimson red blood fly outward immediately before the car was gone, under the overpass. The engine block, now covered in blood, lay in the lap of the driver. Another boom came as the car crashed hard into something down below. Then silence. Derek's ears were ringing. He was trembling all over and his body was suddenly cold, like he had just had ice water dumped over him. Terry grabbed him by his collar, yelling at him too. "Come on, come on." The words didn't register to Derek, but Terry pulled him hard enough for him to start moving. They jumped back onto the ATV and sped off towards the woods. In 5 minutes they were back at Derek's house. As he jumped off the back of the quad, Terry turned to face him, tears streaming down his face. "Not a word to anyone, ever. We never speak of this again. If you do, I'll kill you, Derek. I swear to God I will. Nothing left to lose, 'cause we'll be fucked anyway, you hear?" Derek didn't respond. He just turned and walked over towards his back door. That night, Derek didn't talk to his mom or his dad. He didn't play any games with his brother or read a book to his sister. He just stayed in his room and cried. The next morning he heard a news report. Someone had dropped an engine block from the overpass and through the windshield of a car, not far from their house. The impact killed a 37-year-old man from Shreveport. His wife died after the car had swerved into a support pole. There were no witnesses. Alice looked down at her watch. 2:33 a.m. She figured now was as good a time as any and pulled off to the side of the road, got out of the car, and lit a cigarette. The flaming ash looked like a tiny lighthouse against the pitch-black sky. Alice peered over the guardrail that sat, ineffectively, before a large steep cliff. She remembered this spot. She had drove down this stretch of highway, coming back from wine country, after a trip with Marshall. It was early on in their marriage, and Alice recalled being happy, laughing with Marshall about this and that, and reminiscing about the good trip they had just took. She ashed the cigarette over the guardrail, and then she stepped over it herself, looking down into the black void. Alice pondered how far the drop really was. She walked back to the car, stomped out her cigarette, reaching down for the butt and stuffing it in her pocket. She walked over to Marshall's window and looked down at him. Marshall was soaked in his own blood, the gaps in his neck now black, and the skin around the greenish-blue hue. His chest caked as well, and his hands scratched and useless laying limply at his sides. He had woken up in the car even though Alice had been sure he was dead. Gasping for air, he looked up at her and kept repeating, "Please, please, I didn't mean to. I'm sorry." It was eerie for Alice to hear him beg like that. Not as eerie as the first time, though. I'm sorry, too. The honest truth was, Alice wasn't sorry at all. Marshall deserved it. She always figured she or Marshall might be killed during one of his tirades. But something had changed in her that past year, the past week, and tonight especially. She realized all the contempt and hatred for Marshall she had at once. She hated living in constant fear and worrying about what might trigger him. She hated that she couldn't manage to conceive a baby with him, and that it seemed like he didn't want to. She hated that he had fucked his secretary and never told her about it. She hated what he had done to her, and what she knew he would continue to do. She knew he was a bad man, and bad men deserved to die. It was funny she had heard this over and over in her head as she went to grab the kitchen knife in a voice she didn't think was her own. She told Marshall some animal had knocked the trash over and was rummaging through what had spilled out. She was much too afraid to shoo the animal off herself. Marshall, being drunk and angry, yelled for a few minutes how it was likely nothing, and she was just being stupid. Mad at having to get up, he scowled at Alice, walked to the back of the house with her. The garbage can had been knocked over, by Alice, of course, but there weren't any animals scrounging for leftovers, not as far as Marshall could tell. He meant to look up and say, "See, I told you. Why do you have to waste my time?" But before the first word even made it out, Alice had stabbed him. The knife sunk into his neck easy, and as Alice pulled it out, Marshall stumbled from his crouched position and went to one knee. Trying to talk only made the blood start flowing faster. She repeated her assault until Marshall's neck and chest were full of holes. None were exceptionally deep, though, as the knife wouldn't seem to penetrate past the halfway point. Marshall was still alive, but barely. He began to cry and tried to plead with Alice. "Please, please, I didn't mean to, I'm sorry." He repeated this over and over. Alice stood up and wiped the blood from the knife away on her pants. She hadn't had much time to plan what to do after her initial impulse, and decided on the spot that this was her only chance. "Please, please, I'm so sorry," Marshall croaked. "Let's go to the hospital, Marshall. Get up. Please get up." Alice said this as she ushered him stumbling towards the car. She was crying too now. It wasn't a surprise to her after what had happened. It should have never come to this. "We'll get you fixed up. I'm so sorry." As they went to the car, Alice doing her best to support the gravely injured Marshall. Blood poured from his wounds into the grass. A lot of blood was sticking to Alice as well, as Marshall's skin was too slippery to hold. A few times he fell. The whole time he begged. Right as they were reaching the car, Marshall leaned over to throw up. Alice drove the kitchen knife into his neck one final time. Marshall sputtered and wheezed. His eyes looked up to Alice pleadingly. Vomit now covered his blood-soaked face. "I'm so sorry," he whispered. "Please, I didn't mean to." He wheezed for another few minutes, then Alice heard nothing. She ran back to the garbage cans behind the house and picked them up. She grabbed the hose and did her best to wash up the large amount of blood. The spigot no more than 5 feet from the large pool of scarlet liquid seeping into the cracks of concrete and the grass. She would have to bleach all this, of course. She just had to make sure any initial police presence wasn't enough to spot it. When she was finished, she ran to the car Marshall still slumped over in the front seat, where she left him. Marshall lay in the front seat of the car dying, the slow drone of the motor barely detectable as the vehicle stormed up the PCH. He was brought to, and from memories of his life, almost like they were dreams. One stood out above the rest. Marshall was awoken in the middle of the night to the sound of the jungle around him erupting. There was an ambush. The North Vietnamese were attacking their base, and mortars fell with deafening proximity. The sound of screaming and machine gun fire filled the night air. Marshall looked to his left and saw a small group of soldiers, at least 3 of whom he recognized as members of his own platoon, make a break for the tree line closest to him. 10 yards from the jungle, they were mowed down by machine gun fire that seemed to come from the blackness itself. The Viet Cong were waiting for them. Marshall had no clue what to do. His training told him to stay low and find a group. It was utter chaos, though. Any group he managed to get in line with dispersed almost as soon as he tried to ask for an order. In the midst of all this, he heard a familiar voice shout, "Marshall! Marshall! This way!" It was Derek. Marshall whipped his head behind him just in time to see Derek standing 30 or 40 yards from the tree line. It seemed a small group had managed to clear out whatever Viet Cong had been covering the woods there, and were moving to regroup in the cover of the trees. Marshall ran over to where Derek was standing. There was a tremendous boom and a blinding flash. Marshall was knocked off his feet, but regrouped quickly. When the dust settled, he no longer saw Derek. The concussion effects from the blast began to wear off, and Marshall heard his friend's cries. Derek had been standing only 10 or so feet from the mortar shell that had hit. Both of his legs were gone, as well as his left hand. His face was ripped apart and looked like a young child's wet papier-mâché project. Marshall nearly threw up, his eyes stung with tears and his body aching from injury. Through his screams of agony, Derek was speaking very clear phrases to no one in particular. "Please, please, I didn't mean to," he said through his disfigured mouth, barely distinguishable from the rest of his broken and bloody face. "I'm so sorry. Please, please." He began repeating the words, "I didn't mean to," over and over, until the life slipped from his eyes. Derek was dead. That was the last memory Marshall would ever have, as no sooner had he seen the lights fade from Derek's eyes, had the light faded from his own. The car, moving roughly 60 miles per hour, slammed right through the weak old guardrail that had no business even trying to stop a fast-moving SUV, and plunged down the cliff. It was over 300 feet before the vehicle impacted anything at all, and when it did, it was rock solid. The car exploded on impact, and Marshall, as well as any possible evidence of the violent crime committed against him, disintegrated with it. Alice could barely stand up. She was sure her hip was broken, or maybe her back. Either way, she had done it. Jumping from a moving car ended up being the scariest thing she'd ever done, scarier than even the worst of Marshall's drunken fits. She hit the ground just feet from the edge of the road, and didn't even manage to see the car go over. She heard the explosion though, and when she peered over the edge, she saw a small orange dot of flame, hundreds of feet below. She had done it. She had killed Marshall, and now she would do her best to get away with it, to live the life of freedom she had been dreaming about. Alice sighed deeply, then smiled, and began limping very slowly down the highway. After a half an hour or so of walking down the PCH, she saw a car was coming up the road. Alice let out a long breath and began waving her hands. She stepped out into the middle of the road and attempted to flag the car down. She figured a small, dainty damsel in distress like her, out in the middle of the road at nearly 3 a.m., would surely draw enough attention for the driver to stop. The car did not slow, however, and Alice realized only too late. She tried to move off to the side, but her broken body was slow, and her movements impeded. The pickup truck began to veer in her direction to make matters worse, and Alice screamed. She was hit directly by the truck. Her body crumpled into a barely put together pile of meat as it smashed into and lay against the guardrail. Buck Stanhope woke up immediately. He was drunk, and he'd fallen asleep at the wheel. His truck was a mere 5 yards or so from the guardrail and the cliff below. At first, Buck considered himself lucky, as he could have easily been dead at the bottom of the cliff. But then he noticed the blood. There, sitting like a ruby red beacon of something incredibly wrong, was blood splatter on the hood of his truck. Buck got out of his car, not making a sound, and looked back behind him. It was dark, but he could make out what looked like a broken life-size marionette puppet, smushed up unnaturally against the guardrail, just 30 feet or so behind him. He heard the faintest whisper of voice. "Please, please. I didn't mean to, I'm sorry." Buck stood next to the woman as she repeated this phrase over and over. After about a minute or so, her voice stopped completely, and so did her breathing. The woman was dead. Fear and panic gripped Buck, and he did the only thing his mind would allow. He picked up the body and stuffed it into the back seat of his truck. Fumbling with the keys, he started the pickup and drove as casually as he could make it seem towards the lake. He had to hide the body somewhere.